on up to yonder, beyond the lights neon. Fluorescent, my essence is something to ponder. Your talent ain't something to squander. Blessed and favored so highly, anointed, appointed I might be. This is that all that podcast featuring Khyrie.
Welcome back to another episode of the All That Podcast. Today, I have someone joining us from Toronto, Canada. First time we had somebody from Toronto on the show, so that's the first. So I have Mr. Amanda Chen on the show. She is an entrepreneur. She is a college professor. She hosts her own podcast. She is an author, and yeah, I'm pretty sure she's a lot of other things that I didn't even mention. But without further ado, how are you, Miss Amanda?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored. And yeah, give it up for Toronto.
Yeah, shout out. Six God. So, all right, you have a lot that you do, so we have a lot to talk about. But I think when we first spoke over the phone, the conversation was centered around a project you did called 100 Masked Men. Mm-hmm. And which I thought was interesting and like so different. So for the people at home, she interviewed 100 men anonymously, right?
Yeah.
100 men, 100 hours, and you were asking questions about relationships, I guess gender roles, sex, all these things. So I guess my question to you would be, what made you want to do this project in the first place?
I think during the pandemic, it was a moment of reflection for everyone, especially if you were living in a single household and you were wondering, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And what matters to me the most. And I took a step back and realized that all of my relationships with men weren't very positive examples. And then I wondered if all of the other experiences or examples of bad relationships with men were a projection of mine as well, where I didn't allow the existence of positive relationships with men, because obviously they exist. I have friends that have had great relationships with men. I either just didn't allow any space to hear that out, or there was something about me that just didn't want to see that in reality. So I thought, well, if the world is going to end, at least to improve my relationships with men, that needs to at least be better, so that, if we come out of this pandemic and things do change, hopefully I'll have a better outlook on my relationships with this other half of the human race.
Do you think did it start with maybe your father, or something early in life? Did you pinpoint where, the issue started?
I think I was in nonstop situationships, casual, kind of unhealthy relationships. Right before the pandemic, I was also working behind the bar. So it just wasn't a very positive environment to be in as a woman, all of the sexism, and it didn't change. It didn't help fix that outlook that I already had a very negative view on men. So I think I tried to open up to men a little bit more, but here I was still forcing a perceived expectation of what men are supposed to be like in my life. So I think it was more just modern dating and the world that we live in, and can we actually find true connection? Gotcha. My dad, on the other hand, he started to get a lot more paranoid during the pandemic, just thinking that everyone's watching him and that you guys have to be careful about the neighbors saying things about you, all this kind of nonsense. And there was this moment where I just looked at him like a disgusting person, and I thought, I also have to see myself as this disgusting person, because at some point in time, I was equally this narrow-minded about my assumptions about people, specifically just men in a generalized sense. And I would speak about all men as if they were just one being based on my personal experience, and realized how unfair that was. So it was more just like a check for myself to realize I'm the problem at this point. I need to change my viewpoint to ultimately change my life. So I'm just not holding on to this negativity anymore.
Wow, that is a lesson for everyone listening because most people do the opposite, right? You see women all the time on social media, and a lot of it is warranted. Talking about men or talking down on men, but instead of you choosing to sustain that place of hating men, you took the initiative to like, okay, I'm gonna dive all the way in, and I'm gonna be open with men I don't even know,
Hmm.
and and I'm going to put myself in a position to get to know them better. And and you spoke about checking yourself and having that self-awareness, which I think everybody, male or female, could learn from you. So that was very, kudos to you for that. So
Thanks.
how do you even get in touch with 100 men? Let's talk about that. Like, what was the process of getting people to do the interviews?
So at the beginning, I think the first 10 were just guys I already knew.
Mm,
And coming from a very, uh, I guess, a very strong feminist point of view, a lot of my male friends already knew what kind of conversations I would have with them. So they were prepared and totally normal with that. It was when I had to get out of my network of my 10 people that I know,
right.
and I started asking for people to recommend other people. So I began finding men in the mental health space that were willing to speak vulnerably.
Mm-hmm.
But then I got to men that were speaking more politically. I realized even though that they were wearing a mask, there was still some desire for them to impress me somehow, or at least get me to favor them or approve of them or whatever they were speaking about. And also there was this like safety of, oh, we can't say certain things about how we really feel in front of a feminist in
Mm-hmm.
case we're going to get canceled,
Right.
or any of this kind of weird fear.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a lot more people through Clubhouse, which were more just vocal about points of view. And then I think around season 2, I was like, I just want to find people that are an example of what men are fearful of. So a lot of it is men that got canceled. So I thought, okay, maybe let me find men that got canceled.
Mm-hmm.
Let me find men that did get arrested for sexual harassment. What happened to them?
Wow.
And can they share their stories? And that was when things really got interesting, and I got a lot more men um, wanting to be on the show to share these stories because they had a chance. They didn't have to reveal themselves. They had this opportunity to tell their version of the story. And I think this is when it really flipped, because I had a lot of women that were like, well, do you believe him? And I said, does it matter? It's just the perspective at this time.
Right.
Right. And I think that really changed how I moved forward with podcasting, because it wasn't about my opinion on this person. It was really finally about just having an open conversation, having someone reveal their version of it. True or not, it's how they felt, and there's some validity to it, and you take what you want out of that story.
Right. Wow. So I'm gonna go off a little bit and talk about council culture.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think what you did, and you was like, people asking you, did you believe them or whatever? And he's like, it doesn't matter. Like, they have a chance to tell their side of the story, because there's always three sides to the story: your side, the
Mm-hmm.
other person's side, and the truth. So we as human beings are so complex, you know, and I always say, like, just speaking biblically, right? The people, because that's what most people in America practice Christianity. So, and that's what I practice. So I'm gonna just go off of that. So
Mm-hmm.
if I always say that if the disciples, the 12 people plus Mary Magdalene, who was a prostitute, um, if they lived in modern times, they would have not been able to accomplish what they accomplished because they would have been canceled. The guy who wrote most of the New Testament was a murderer. He murdered people before he became a disciple. Mary
Mm-hmm.
Magdalene, like I said, she was a prostitute. You know what I mean? All these people, Matthew was a tax collector, that was looked at bad. All these people Jesus surrounded himself with were what society would call outcast, or they would cancel them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how are you practicing this religion and everything you believe is based off of former murderers or former, people you would counsel in today's time? You know what I mean? So to me, counsel culture, like, people are so complex. And, it's like, how can you counsel somebody? Like Malcolm X. when he was quote unquote Detroit Red, right? When he was a thug, he was, in the streets going in and out of jail. If he was not allowed to become Malcolm X, you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
where's I think in society, we're missing, I think the word for it is grace. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because everybody has done something that they don't want on the headline of a newspaper. Everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I just have a problem with cancel culture. I believe in accountability culture,
Yes.
but I don't believe in council culture. You know?
I agree. And I
Yeah.
think because that cancel culture exists, a lot of people are afraid to be accountable and own up for their actions because they're afraid of the extreme version of that punishment, if there is even going to be one.
Right.
And then they see these other people that might have just gotten extreme punishment because they're famous or they're just in the limelight for whatever reason. That shouldn't be the indicator of whether or not you should tell your truth.
Right. Facts.
Yeah.
Did you get any pushback from feminist community for doing this project?
It wasn't so much pushback, but just like looking at me sideways, like,
Mm.
why are you giving them space? You spent all of this energy on the years before pointing fingers at them, telling them that they were the problem. And I'm still saying that there's problems to be
Mm.
made, but the approach to it wasn't helping. Like, it's not me pointing fingers at you, it's your fault, it's whose fault. Because how does that fix it? If you're deliberately telling someone that it's their fault for something, what's the likelihood for them to want to improve and fix that?
Right. Just gonna be
Nothing.
defensive. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously it resulted in defense. And then, cancel culture came in. So they're like, oh, great, we can't be defensive. So we're just going to be quiet. Right. And
Right.
then you just had this group of quiet men saying that they're supporting women, but then women are like, where's the, action to this? Where's the proof? I want you to show it. And like, it was more this fear of cancel. And I think that's what really alerted me. I was like, well, how am I going to get allies if I'm not even making the environment a safe place for them to show up?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately I'm shooting myself in the foot because I'm not even giving them a chance to show up in the way that they want to show up by like saying, oh, you got to do it like this, which is, i.e., you got to be a woman to
Right.
show up, which is like, okay, well, what do I do if I'm a man?
Right. Why did you name it? Right, because you could have named it 100 men, but it
Mm-hmm.
was a deliberate choice to say 100 masked men. So why did you name it 100 masked men?
At that time, it was early in the pandemic where people were
Oh, like
questioning,
literally wearing masks.
literally questioning whether or not they should wear a mask. And it's
Yeah.
like, is this good for me or is this good for society? And
Mm,
it's really funny about the rationale to why you would wear a mask. It's like, oh, I'm wearing a mask to protect myself, or I'm wearing a mask to protect others, or I'm wearing a mask because there's a sign that says I have to.
mm,
And it made me realize, how many times are we doing something because we think the other person would judge us favorably or unfavorably based on that decision? How many masks are we actually wearing in our society? And this one is a physical mask that we're wearing, and there's so much uproar about it. So I think that was the spring off for the idea of the masked men,
What
and
did you,
also that they're anonymous.
right? What did you learn about yourself from this project?
Learning about I didn't know how to listen. So at the
Mm,
very beginning, I was waiting for the opportunity to catch them at the wrong word and yell at them. It was just, I just wanted, um, I don't know, redemption for all of the moments that I couldn't speak up.
mm-hmm.
And here I am just attacking these totally innocent people that didn't know that they were going to be coming on my show to get yelled at. So that was the beginning of it, to then realize, okay, now I got to sit and be quiet. And then I lost control of the show. I was just super quiet, and the conversation just ended up like a monologue of these guys. To finally find the balance there and learn how to have a conversation, which is like half active listening and half, challenging questions, and also sharing your own vulnerability. I think that was the beginning of me sharing it, because if I'm not vulnerable, how can I expect the other to respond? Because you lead by example in anything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized I was here waiting for them to just like pour their whole heart out, like, why would they do that if they don't know anything about me? So actually, I ended up having a lot of conversations before the interview where we'd have moments to just share our stories. So then once we get on, we feel a little bit more comfortable and we're able to share more deeply.
Right. So you went into this project with a certain perspective of men.
Mhm.
So how did your perspective change coming out of the project? What are some things that you were like, I had that messed up, I looked at that wrong, you know. So what was that like?
So I was so focused on what women perceived as empowering and what transparent communication is and what consent is supposed to look like when
Mm-hmm.
you just dump everything on the table and you give people the opportunity to say yes or no and what that looks like. It wasn't that black and white towards the end of it. Coming from the male side of it, of like, oh well, I don't want her to think I'm like this, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
want people around me to think like this. I started to realize that there's more of a desire for approval with other men than actually the woman that this man is probably trying to talk to, which I
Mm.
thought was really interesting. And then I learned that the concept of what it is to be feminine was always a form of weakness. Like if you do anything girly or feminine, you'll get attacked for that regardless in whatever peer group that is. It could be fathers, peers, brothers, whoever. And the biggest learning was realizing that masculinity was so fragile because you can be emasculated, but a female cannot be effeminated. You can't take that away
Yeah.
from her. So I think that also shows that the definition of a man comes out of the opposite definition of a woman.
Mm.
So it strengthens what a woman looks like, and dilutes what a man looks like because he can only work within the opposite.
That's interesting. So when I did my project called the Man Series, hasn't came out yet, but you know the question that opens it up is, what is a man? And
Mm-hmm.
you know people had different answers. My answer was, men, we are so fluid that I can't really pinpoint a definition for what it is, for what it looks like. I mean, it's up to the person. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have complexities, and I think at our root, men and women, we are artists. You know what I mean? A lot of us are artists. We have this art. We want to express ourselves, you know, artistically, and but what happens is these definitions, right, that society puts on how you're supposed to act, what you're supposed to do, boom, boom, boom. We are constrained. You know what I mean? So now we live in this box, and we're frustrated, you know, internally because we want to express ourselves how we see fit. You know what I mean? And the story I told is, you know, I'm a big Beyonce fan, and I was at work one day, and I was singing Me, Myself, and I think about Beyonce. And they had females and they had males there. And, you know, obviously the females were jamming out to it. I'm jamming out to it. And the guys are kind of like making little remarks. They're kind of chilling, you know, for the most part. But once they saw that the girls were feeling it, you know what I mean? And they were not looking at me a certain way because I was singing it. Then all of a sudden they joined in. And I'm like,
Mm.
you listen to Beyonce, like
Uh-huh.
in your car or your bedroom
Yep.
or in the shower. You listen to her, but you would never show that in public because of what people might think. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So it's weird, but so yeah, couldn't come up with a definition for what a man is because it's fluid. Like I don't know. Do you think you have a definition of what a man is?
I I don't. I
Yeah,
know a lot of people told me provider, protector, um, kind of
yeah, that was the answers too.
normal roles, hero
Mm-hmm.
roles.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think unfortunately with that definition, it's so such a big word and such a small word at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for you to connect yourself because you're like, oh, does a provider mean financial? Does that mean physical? Does that mean what? You know, and
Right.
the fact that you're even attributing yourself to a role that you
Mm-hmm.
have to fulfill, the only way you can fulfill that role is in a relationship with someone else. So if you didn't
Right.
have a relationship, then how are you a provider?
That's
What
a
are you
great
providing
point.
for in the human world? So I think that's a big thing that I learned about, which is like the power of sex and relationships,
Hmm.
and how that contributes to our self-worth, and how much power we give that away for someone else to define our level of worthiness based on that performance.
Mm, great point. Great point. And I always say the definitions that traditionally have been attributed to men often kill men. Literally.
Yeah.
Literally.
Hmm.
Like, now mental health is more accepting in the culture, to where it's okay for a man to be vulnerable. And it still work for a lot of men, to be vulnerable and all that. But before, it's like, I'm gonna turn to alcohol, or I'm gonna turn to women, or I'm gonna turn to drugs, or because I can't express this because that'll make me seem weak. You
Yeah.
know, so I think a lot, like I said, a lot of the definitions literally have killed men. So, in what relationships with the man in your life did you see change after you did the series, and how
So
did it change?
it's very interesting because
Mm-hmm.
when I first started this series, I told you I just came out of a situationship,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned that this person came in here, obviously for a situationship, and I wasn't 100%. I was really going through depression and anxiety at that time. So he saw the worst of me, and I think out of just a normal human instinct, he's like, "Oh, I can't walk out on her now
Mm-hmm.
at this point in time just to like add fuel to this fire." So he stuck around. And then when I obviously got better, I celebrated him, or I praised him for sticking around, and he was like, "Oh man, now I really can't leave." So I felt like
Yeah.
I I stuck this person in a role he didn't want to be in, but I was, too much in my own world to notice that. So that gave me a lot of compassion to understanding like why things happened the way it was, because here I was like, this person stuck around this whole time. He went through all of these things. And a lot of us think, oh, if they stuck around through these times, these hard times, then that means like they love you, or they're truly committed. But that actually has nothing to do. Like time and the specific state of mind that you're in has nothing to do with the longevity or seriousness of your relationship.
Right.
So that was the first thing I learned, after talking to a lot of other men. And then I began my journey hoping that at the end of the 100 series, I'd find my, you know, Prince Charming, whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
that'd be it for me. Hopefully, with these 100 connections, we'll get there.
Right.
And I feel like I manifested my ideal partner, um, which is going to, look a certain way, work in a specific space, whatever. And I got all of that. He was like the what every woman, I guess, would want,
Mm-hmm.
um, was also a freedom fighter activist, was also whatever build that I preferred at that time and all these things. And then again, he had to follow through with this role that didn't fit who he was. And finally I'm at a place where I I don't even I don't see romantic relationships the same way as I used to anymore. I really prioritize platonic relationships and connecting with people first before thinking like, oh, what are we going to look like as a
Mm-hmm.
combo? And I think that's what we think of. We're like, oh, who's the perfect compatibility to this and that?
Right.
And in society, we're going to look like the biggest power couple. Then what is really the point of dating this person? Are you dating this person for like their car, their status, for both of your families to connect? Like, what is the reason behind it?
Things that's not
Um,
sustainable. Right.
exactly. It
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't work out. So I think that's when I learned like it's not even about like what list is on what you think is attractive or what you believe at the end of the day. All of it had to do with the society that you're living in and who you're trying to impress. And you should never treat another human as a means to gaining whatever that credibility is.
What did you learn about the differences in approach, mentality, to sex between men and women?
A lot of not wanting to be accountable for things,
Mm.
and a lot of like, well, this person said that person said this, and so we come to this consensus, or just a lot of lack of understanding and or desire to understand. Again, back to the cancel culture, some people were just like, I have to be super loud about it and announce to everyone that I cheated on my wife with this other girl, and I need to punish myself so that in case someone punishes me instead. It was very strange. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like the anti-bullying scenario where it's like I'll bully myself and make fun of myself first, and then no one can do it worse than me.
Right.
Super weird. Um, and another thing is if you, let's say, didn't condemn yourself automatically,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to make a change, but you're already now condemned, people are calling you a whatever, and how are you ever going to get redeemed in society? Because if there is no redemption, what's the point in even trying to change?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of loss there of like, well, if you called me, whatever, a cheater for life, what's the point in changing my ways if you're always going to title me as that?
Right. Well,
So
I'm gonna just live up to what you said.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing there, right? So
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing. Society won't allow for us to be a new version of what we're trying to be and celebrate growth and change and healing.
Right. So you also wrote in a book called Let's Pivot,
Mm-hmm.
and you were chapter 6, correct?
Yes.
So you wrote about how people pivoted from un favorable circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
right? So can you talk about that? Because in life, you never know what's going to come up. You just have to be ready to adapt. And you also, with your move to Mexico, that was an adapt.
Mm-hmm.
You had to adapt there, and I'm sure other things in your life that I don't know about. But us as humans, period, we have to, be ready to pivot and be ready to adapt. So, can you talk about what you learned from speaking to people about, how they pivoted, especially during pandemic, which was a pivot for everybody, and other situations?
Yeah. I think unfortunately in the beginning of the pandemic and pivoting, people were all out for themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's a level playing field now. Everyone has the ability to do anything, which
Mm,
is good and bad. I think the internet really gave a lot of opportunity for anyone to to redeem themselves. It's not about who you know and being on the ground and knowing specific people and having that status anymore. It's just like, oh, if I can make a really cool product, get it online, get enough eyes on it, then I'll be successful. So that really changed the dynamic of businesses.
mm,
But I think what kept a business going is building a community, whether that's online or offline. It's about a space that matters to you. So again, it's kind of like the anti-cancel culture of like, how are we going to do this together? And who are we going to choose to support? And what's the point of me even doing this? I think once we started to get those answers, then pivoting doesn't feel so intense because you have that support of that community helping you throughout the journey.
right. Well, Miss Amanda, thank you for coming on, dropping some wisdom. I love everything you're doing. I wish you much success in everything because I'm pretty sure you'll be, you know, a full author, have a book like a, a book, you on a book tour, you'll be doing more amazing projects. I'm just speaking all that into you, putting it
Oh,
out
thank
there.
you.
So yeah, it's been a long time coming for this episode since, like, you think you said we talked in March, our first conversation. Also, didn't Daniel hook us up? Was it
He
Daniel?
did.
Shout out to
Yeah,
Daniel, man, my
I
boy
saw him
from
in
London.
Mexico City.
You
Yeah.
did? Yeah. Shout out to Daniel for hooking us up, and hopefully we can collaborate on something in the future.
Yeah.
Because I feel like
Absolutely.
our content is kind of on the same wavelength. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
All right,
Appreciate it.
talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Go listen to 100 Max Men. Go read Let's Pivot. You want to give the people your socials and where they can find you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at missamandachen.com or on socials at missamandachen. Yeah, it's all there.
There it is. Peace out, Six God. And I'll talk to you soon.